As far as the drug scene at the time, there was a lot of marijuana, and I mean, this was just part of the music atmosphere. But if you were really being a director of photography and coming in and designing how you were going to shoot something and taking advantage of existing circumstances and creating lighting opportunities and all the rest of this, you did not want to be stoned. You wanted to have your head on straight.
The culture bothered me. And because it bothered me, and I was playing people involved in the culture, it bothered me even more, because I had to be a very good actor to get through both those movies. And not because I disdained it or put it down. They wanted to do that, fine. I drank Coca-Cola all day. I was just as stoned as they were. I didn't know it. But as a caffeine freak, look, first thing I asked for today is a Coke and a donut. I mean, who am I kidding?
I did a great deal of research in preparation for the trip, which is what I do on all of my films. I read Tim Leary's book, I talked to a number of people, and I determined I could not really do a picture on LSD without trying it. We were coming out of the 50s, which was a fairly conservative, not as conservative as some people think, but a fairly conservative period. It was sort of recovering from the Second World War. People wanted a normal life. By the beginning of the 60s, the young people were chafing at the normal life and were rebelling. The Vietnam War was part of it. There was great, as everybody knows, protest against the Vietnam War, particularly among young people, because they were the ones who were going to be drafted, which was part of it, and they didn't believe in the cause. This led to a certain extent, a lack of belief in authority everywhere.
It was a fascinating place to be in the late 60s because there was an awful lot of activity going on, and it was to travel with rock and roll was just astounding. And it wasn't of a documentary nature that what we were doing, maybe a little bit, but mostly it was finding illustrations. It was like moving album covers or whatever you wanted to say that would provide the impact that you'd have for different phrases of the record.
More and more pictures were being made independently, and the independents seemed to understand the beat, as it were, of young people more than the bureaucracies at the major studios.
The films at the time were various targets for montage, to tell you the truth. We would just basically see things that were going on in the city, and some of which had to do with rock and roll and some of which didn't.
The reason I did first The Wild Angels and then The Trip was because I had been working almost steadily on a series of Edgar Allan Poe pictures, and my theory, and I always had some theory, right or wrong, about the film, my theory was that Poe was writing out of the unconscious mind, and we should never see reality. Everything should be artificial and shot in a studio. And I'd been shooting in studios for a number of years, and I simply said, I don't want to do any more Poe films. I now want to break completely away. I want to tap in to what was happening with young people all around me, and I want to shoot on the streets. And that was the origin first of the Wild Angels, because the Hells Angels were becoming an important symbol, and secondarily The Trip, because LSD and the whole culture around it was becoming important. And I felt there was a great deal to be said about the culture behind both the Hells Angels and the LSD and drug-taking culture, unpopular though that thought might be with some people.
On the Wild Angels, I never heard of LSD. I didn't know anything about it. I was not into the drug culture at all, because I ran every day, and I thought drugs would make me get hair on my palm or go crazy or something. So I didn't really hear of it then. Then when we got ready to do The Trip, Roger asked me, he said, now you're going to do The Trip. And the script, and so he sent me the script. Now Jack wrote the script.
I knew Jack Nicholson was very much into the culture, and he was a very good writer. He had written several scripts for me, and I thought they were excellent. So I asked him to write a new script. we discussed the way it would go, as a director and writer will do, and he wrote a very fine script. There was only one slight problem with it. He wrote some effects in that simply we couldn't do on our budget, but I did what I could to come close to those effects. I did a great deal of research in preparation for the trip, which is what I do on all of my films. I read Tim Leary's book, I talked to a number of people, and I determined I could not really do a picture on LSD without trying it. And I was sort of the straightest guy in a very wild group. So in Tim Leary's book, he talked about the set and the setting. So I thought for the setting, Big Sur was the most beautiful place I knew within easy driving distance. And I said, I think I'll go up to Big Sur. And when a number of other people heard that I was doing it, they said, let's all go up together. So we had a caravan of people going up to Big Sur, and we finally ended up with almost the equivalent of a motion picture schedule as to what time each person would take it, because I didn't want to have something where everybody was zonked out on LSD. We had a few people who were straight while the other people are on LSD, and then when the other people came off the LSD and were straight again, then the other group took the LSD. I saw so many images, and some of them were so wild. For instance, I remember one where I was floating in the sky, and the atmosphere seemed to be a golden orange, like a sunset, but the whole sky was sunset. And a sailing ship, like a clipper ship or something like that, started to sail through the sky towards me. And as I looked, the sails turned to jewels. And it was a ship with jewels sailing towards me. And as it came closer, I realized it was a ship, but it was also a woman, and her body was made of jewels, and the sails of the jewels were all moving in the wind.
I read the script, and I called Jack up, who I'd just gotten to know. So Jack says, what are you doing about the drugs, Derns? I said, well, just tell me, what is LSD? I mean, what does it do? He says, ask Roger. He's the big authority on the drug. So I said, okay. So I went to the set, and I said, Roger, now just give me a little history, because I don't get this drug. Roger said he took an acid trip. He laid on the ground, face down. He looked into the earth, and he studied what was under the grass for about 7 hours. And I said, well, there's nothing under the grass. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. He said, I saw all the way to the center of the earth.
Bruce is right. I remember seeing through to the center of the earth and thinking that I had just invented a new art form. The creator would lie spread-eagled on the earth, looking face down into the earth, and his creation, whether it was music or a painting or a motion picture, would transmit through the earth, and anybody else who was laying face down on the earth would receive the piece of art uninterrupted.
I said, hey, you saw nothing beyond where the worms and the beetles and shit are. Don't tell me that you saw beyond that. Oh, yeah. You have no idea what's down there, Bruce. And he was laughing about it, but he was dead serious that he took it, and that's what he saw. So I said, well, this is not for me. So I'm going to have to be an actor here. You know, I can't just phone this in.
Now, this right here is Thorazine. Don't worry, it's just in case you happen to go on a bad trip. This brings you back right away, immediately, okay? Okay.
And I started realizing after about the first 6 hours of the first day that we were dealing with a really dangerous drug. If you didn't have somebody with you who was complete charge of you. And it wasn't until then that I really started to realize the responsibility of the guide, of the person that sends you on the trip, and the enormity of the responsibility he takes on.
And one other thing, too. You must have absolute confidence and faith in me. You must trust that. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to be right with you as long as you need me. You got to trust that.
He is the voice of reason in a world of illusion, yet he is sympathetic to the illusion. And he steadies Peter Fonda, who's playing the lead, he steadies Peter and gives him help and support through the trip. So the role was very, very important. Jack Nicholson came to the set several times. He had very strong opinions as to what the props and set dressing should be, which is something screenwriters normally don't think of, but he, and I agreed with him, felt that all of the paintings, the paraphernalia around the rooms and so forth were important because they reflected the life of the people. And he was looking at that, and we were also discussing various ways to do it because he understood, maybe not quite as much as I did, but we both understood that what was in the script was a $50 million picture. Or put it another way, picture would have cost so much money it would have been impossible to make. I had to devise ways to give some impression or symbolic version of parts of the images, yet stay within a 3-week schedule and a budget, which I think was about $300,000.
It was so fabulous because he wrote it down. And you better have every one of those goddamn pictures up on the wall or you're not doing the scene right. So the one day that I remember he came to the set was that day because he wanted to make sure all those pictures were in his collage.
Bob Beck's background in light shows really came into play because Bob used liquid light projectors, he used strobe lights, he used all kinds of devices for changing color gels in the middle of a shot.
I worked with Bob and Allen in one way, primarily in post-production. Some of the other work was done during production. For instance, at that time, body painting and psychedelic colors and so forth was used a great deal. So I would have body paint put on people. And at the same time, I was using very strange lenses. A couple of lenses broke up the image into sections. So a lot of it was done on the set, in the camera, and then a great deal was done by Bob, Beck, and Allen post-production, in which they took our images and treated them with multiple layers of images they created, which sometimes weren't even images, it was just light, and sometimes liquid flowing across the frame. So it was a combination of the post-production of Bob and Allen and the actual production that we did. I think one of the reasons that the audience came in such large numbers was out of curiosity. They didn't really want to take LSD, but the reviews and comments said that this came somewhat close to an LSD experience, so they could take it without taking it. I must say, however, I knew right after the trip I had in Big Sur that I could never reproduce this on film. The images, the feelings, the emotion were so overwhelming that there was no way to translate that from your mind to the screen. You could get some of it, which I think I did, but you could never get it all. I wanted the picture not to be a pro-LSD picture and not to be an anti-LSD picture, because my trip was very good. I had no bad effects in my trip at all. It was wonderful. Yet I felt I really shouldn't be accused of proselytizing for LSD, and at the same time I knew people had bad trips, so I was trying to be neutral. And I had to ask other people what had happened on their bad trips and incorporate some of what they had experienced into it to make it neutral.
The late 60s was the new age. And what evolved was we all survived. And we all survived with 1, the dream intact, 2, the baton in our hands, and 3, the industry floundering into which direction to go.
I do think that the experimentation, particularly on the part of independent young filmmakers in the 60s, led to greater success and greater acceptance by the major studios in the 70s. I could mention three seminal pictures, although there were others. First was The Wild Angels, which was my film. Second was The Trip. And after The Trip, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper did Easy Rider. Each one was a success, but Easy Rider was the greatest success. It may have been at the time, I think it was the biggest grossing independent film ever made, and it really captured the youth audience that hadn't been prepared for the earlier pictures. And I think those three pictures, plus a number of others, propelled the major studios to put big budgets into these subjects and to bring a number of the people into their world who had started in the independent world.
I know Peter Gardner was aware of the trip was coming up, that we were going to do, he wanted to see if there was something we could do for it. And Roger Corman was always open to somebody who had ideas that could be done for very little money. And so I remember Peter went in and interviewed with Roger, and then I was brought in to talk about how we would shoot it, what we would do. Some of it was not about shooting, it was just about providing the environmental, the psychedelic lighting, etc. for the effects. In fact, it's the first screen credit I ever got, and it says Psychedelic Special Effects by Peter Gardner, Bob Beck, and Allen Daviau, and it's one of those strange things, but it had to do with the lighting of the hallucinogenic scenes. Bob Beck's background in light shows really came into play because Bob used liquid light projectors, he used strobe lights, he used all kinds of devices for changing color gels in the middle of a shot. And Peter went in, and I remember being at the second meeting, which I think was at Roger Corman's house, between Peter and Roger, and basically the deal was $10,000 for everything, and that's it. And Peter was going, oh, no, we have to do this. But that's what it stayed. It stayed at $10,000. The major thing were the love scenes, which was Peter Fonda with Susan Strasberg and Peter Fonda with a beautiful blonde lady named Sally Saxey. And those were done at what is now the Raleigh Studios. And I remember we went in there, and it was the bedroom set. And I had talked to Archie Dalzell, rest his soul, wonderful cameraman, and Archie, I said, the test that I've run with the color negative is if you push it 2 stops, because the color negative then was 50 ASA. It was a type 5251, and if you pushed it 2 stops, which you never want to do, you could get ASA 200, and that would give you an exposure, so to speak, with just this light, because we knew you couldn't put much other light on it. I mean, he could basically source through sketch in the room, but the light on the people in the love scenes with the psychedelic movement in it was all very, very low level, and you couldn't put a mixture of motion picture light with it. You more or less had to cross your fingers and go with what was going on there. And we had every kind. We had liquid projectors. We had just carousel projectors at odd angles, throwing single images. We had, I think, strobe lights for a little bit, not too much in there. But it was really something to just make these waves of color and the various types of symbols and in the psychedelic visuals that Bob had come up with. And it worked well. And Roger was curious about what was going on, and Archie would say, well, let's see if we can, he was trying to balance things out a little bit. And it was really speaking a new language. It was quite something. I think that it could have been so much better had something, been designed more specifically for it, because what we're basically there to do is show up and bring whatever it was we had and make an image of it. There were a lot of things that Bob Beck had in his slideshows, so to speak, that he would do, environmental slideshows, and some of it we would project and put out of focus. Whether some of it was painting, it's quite possible that it was. A lot of it were purely, as I said, the symbols that were used in light show magic. But by throwing them out of focus and overlapping, you'll see a lot of one source panning on and another panning off as the camera's moving around the people. That was able to get, a really interesting kind of texture over the scene. But it was very, very abstract, and I don't wish to make any great intellectual claims for what were done, because, quite frankly, we were doing everything we could do to keep it happening. And as such, they knew when they had enough to make the scene, and that's what you did with Roger. Is as soon as he knew he had enough to cut the scene, that was it. You were on to the next thing. Roger never labored over things that were not going to contribute further to the picture. He wasn't experimenting. He was there to accomplish what he had in his mind, and as such, I think it was well done. There's a lot of things in other cases where I think we could have done more. There were some things where we did projections on Peter Fonda's face and on Susan Strasberg's face that are in a couple of other moments, and they were done rather quickly. We found things that would look good. Archie would comment, Roger would comment. We might arrange something to go so that the movement of the light went with the movement of a camera in a certain way, and in that part we were creating it on the spot. But I don't think it was illustrated and conceived and so on. It was done on the spur of the moment, because we were there, that we had the people, we had the lighting, and that's what sort of led the combination. They took a lot of stuff that we shot backgrounds for the main titles, and we also shot a lot of things, different effects that we did off of a small screen that combined multiple projectors and so on. And I think Roger took this with his editor, and I would have to give the credit to the editor for how that was used, particularly if it was flash cut in small spots. I know, my recollection is Dennis Jacob worked on this film as well, and Dennis is an absolute brilliant editor. I think if you just put Dennis Jacob in a room with a lot of film, you're going to get something marvelous out of it. I really feel that what happened, what cut loose in the 70s, sure, I mean, people were preparing, to play those roles and to be able to get into making the films that talked about what they wanted to discuss at the time. And I think it was probably more of an intro. What happened in the 70s happened because the right people got in control of the medium, and they basically said, let these people do what they want, because what they're doing is, it's fascinating and it's selling tickets. And there was a great deal of freedom that occurred then before people overthought it. And I think that the basis for that freedom definitely came from the atmosphere of the 60s, but it was people who had studied motion pictures and knew what they wanted to do when they basically got a chance to play with the electric train.